Hey everyone, and welcome to the Unmodern podcast, the podcast where we have unscripted, unapologetic, and uncomfortable conversations that affects everyday people. If you've ever had an outlook, thought, or an opinion that modern day society told you to be silent on, that you would get in trouble for, or if you've ever heard the words, probably shouldn't say that, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Alfred, a husband, father, and an adventure-seeking kind of guy who over the years has learned to have a positive outlook on life, regardless of what society throws at me. So if you're ready to listen, let's go. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm here with Daru. Mutual friend of ours, Ray Cowell, ended up being his business mentor, very similar to how Ray Cowell was my mentor. Daru's got an incredible story immigrating to Canada during probably one of the most creative times here in Canadian history during the pandemic. He's also a consultant. He has a background in supply chain. Daru, how are you doing this morning, brother?
Good on yourself, Alfred. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no, I'm doing great. I'm really excited to dive into this real quick. Ray Cowell, absolute beauty, gentleman who is a business mentor. You guys met through Community Futures. That is something that I had experience with a little over 10 years ago, starting up a small business. Anybody who is interested in that, we'll link Community Futures stuff down below. They are a great support network entering into the small business and entrepreneurial space. Yeah, talk to me a little bit about your history with Ray and how you got involved with him.
Yeah, man. Yeah, Rice. I mean, he's such a legend. So I was fortunate enough to be paired up with Ray to be my business mentor while going through the Community Future Smart Start program. Yeah, and he's just such a wealth of knowledge in the way that he views the world. You look into his eyes and you can see the wheels turning in his head as he's coming up with new and fresh ideas and, looking at things outside of the box. Such a great mind for business and I guess life just as well. And as you've mentioned in a conversation we had earlier, like he's got such energy that he brings. It's almost the man hits the ground running as he wakes up in the morning. So no, that's he's a good friend and yeah, real honor to know him.
Perfect. Yeah, no, my story is very similar. I could feel the energy right from the get-go, and that really helps with, trusting people and really taking their advice and, allowing their energy to really kind of drop your guard and allow yourself to be a sponge. I'm super appreciative of that, Ray. So yeah, I just want to give him one more shout out because yeah, he's an absolute legend. We're gonna dive right into your story, man. Immigrating from South Africa. Let's talk to me a little bit about kind of your work experience and your expertise in South Africa, and then we're gonna get right into crossing the ocean and coming to the great north of Canada.
Yeah, so I guess the story sort of kicked off back in 2014. So my wife is a physician and she is quite she's got close friends with, all of the physicians that she went to medical school with. One of them in particular found themselves in medicine after having gone through the entire immigration process back then already. And that sort of planted the seed for us to sort of say, we looked at one another at some point and sort of said, well, do you want to go to Canada? And, I said, well, yeah, I think that would be real cool. So I don't even think we were married at the time. Yeah, we weren't married at the time, but we officially started the process and started with the paperwork. As I mentioned, I worked for a supply chain company. At that time, I was sort of interested in trying to climb the corporate ladder and build myself to as well as high in the company as I possibly could. And originally, when we started the immigration process for my wife, she needed to complete one exam in order to match her qualifications with what the Canadian colleges would deem acceptable to practice medicine within Canada. We went through that process, but as we went through that process, it sort of changed while they brought in an additional exam, so the process took a little bit longer. I then actually, at the same time, got the promotion, which forced us to move across the country in South Africa, where we're from, to relocate to Cape Town, a great little community called Somerset West. And I then started working as a branch manager for the company down in Cape Town, and my wife was still practicing medicine in Cape Town as well, while she was studying to write the Canadian exams that she needed to qualify for. In 2019, she needed to write her second exam, I believe, and that one at the time you could only write in Canada. So we planned the trip. We came to Canada for 2 weeks, traveled to Edmonton, and she wrote the exam that she needed to write. We spent a bit of time getting to, meeting people, meeting up with fellow South Africans that we know in Canada, and went back home to South Africa. Now, at the time, they said you needed to wait about 6 months for the results to come in. But so if you pass, then you're allowed to start the process to come into Canada through AHS, Alberta Health Services. But if you fail, then you need to wait another year before you can write the exam again. Unfortunately for us, she didn't make that exam, and which forced us to wait another year before she could rewrite the exam, and that brought us to almost the end of 2020. And then by that time, while we were working in South Africa, one of the doctors that was working with my wife at the same hospital planted the idea to sort of say, do you know what would be a good opportunity for us? Her advice is if she takes a job on one of the cruise ships, because on the cruise ships you work 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. So that would allow her to work, earn an income in US dollars, and then you'd still have the third day to study for the exams that you need to write in Canada for an entire year. So that sort of gave birth to this idea that I will resign from my job. She will go on to the cruise ships. I will live with her on a cruise ship for a year while she works and studies. And I believe the deal was it would be $1 a day. So one US dollar a day for me, and then I get to just live with her on the cruise ship. So for me, it started sounding like paradise. So, we sun and drinks and swimming pools, and, you get to hop off in all of the places that the cruise line parks during its course. And then we took that advice. She found one of the larger, I would say, cruise ship companies. She got in contact with them. She got a contract with them, and everything was starting to fall in place. And this was towards the end of 2020, start of 2021. We then, at that time, the College of Surgeons and Physicians and Alberta Health Services required us to have permanent residency prior to getting to Canada. So we completed that process while my wife was studying for exams. So by the time she went to work on the cruise ships, we were both already Canadian permanent residents. So the idea was basically just as soon as she feels comfortable with writing the exam and the next time slot comes up, then she would go and work. We would write the exam and we would hop off from the cruise ships to Canada and start our lives. The only kicker in the process is that when you go onto the cruise ships as a physician, there's a certain hierarchy that they follow. So you've got your main physician that sort of is the team leader, and there's usually two physicians, like secondary physicians that sort of work under the main physician. But all three of those physicians need to be trained in terms of the evacuation procedures for the ship, certain protocols and all those sort of things. Because if there's a passenger on the ship that gets ill, the medical officers do have a certain level of responsibility, but also authority, and that gets closely coordinated with the ship captains when it comes to making decisions as to whether you're turning the ship around to go back to port and canceling the rest of the cruise because it's patient safety first. So on the physicians also automatically get like an officer's rating on the cruise ships as well. So you're also expected, there's certain dinners that you're expected to be at while the passengers are cruising and stuff like that. So that's 60 days worth of training. And while she's going through that training, I'm not allowed to be on the cruise ship with her because they find it might be distracting or something. I can't really remember what the reason for that actually was, but I'm not allowed to be there. Nonetheless, in January of 2021, I drop her off at the airport and I kiss her goodbye, and she's off to Florida to start that journey. I hand in my letter of resignation stating that I will remain with the company until the end of March, and I book a plane ticket for Miami, Florida to fly out on April 4th, which would have been, I almost think it would have been a Tuesday morning. Like I finished up the Friday and I would have flown out on the Tuesday. Um, and in that time period between January and March, obviously from time to time, I'm chatting with my wife over the phone or video calling as it gets, as it allows. And every time we speak, she's telling me, they're not real busy. Everything is fine. They see the odd, somebody slips and falls, and has a wrist sprain or something like that. And towards the end of February, that conversations they started changing. Like every time I spoke to her, she said like they are crazy busy. They are running up and down. People are real sick. They are struggling to breathe. They are, that they don't have enough beds. They don't have enough medication and all of that. And looking back at that now, it's clear now in hindsight that that was sort of the start of the pandemic, sort of running wild throughout the cruise ships. And they were just completely overwhelmed. So by the time about midway through March, South Africa, where I was still in, went into full lockdown. I think this was just shortly after the United States announced the lockdown. So for us, the company that I work for, part of the services that we provide includes medication and some other pharmaceutical products that run through the logistics systems and supply chains. Because we sort of went into prohibition. You couldn't buy alcohol. You weren't allowed to buy like cigarettes, all of that sort of stuff. You had a designated time window within your community that you could go and do shopping. And like you had to almost have proof of address to sort of say, okay, yes, I'm allowed to be outside in this timeline. So we went into full lockdown. I was still allowed to drive up and down because of the nature of the work that I do. Transporting medicine was seen as a critical service, but it was originally only supposed to be for 2 weeks. And that sort of the 2 weeks came and it went on, then they said, okay, it's another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks. And yeah, like things were just going worse and worse and worse on the cruise ship. And yeah, it got to the point where I had resigned, and the house that we lived in. I already set up a contract with the tenant to come and live in the house. So I had to move outside of my own house, not being able to fly to the States. And my wife's on a cruise ship on the other side of the world. So I ended up moving into my little brother's house, where I basically lived for the next couple of months while she was stuck on the cruise ship without being allowed to dock or to offload patients or passengers for that matter. So yeah, it was a real it was a what's the word that I'm looking for? It was a gong show. It was a complete gong show. I don't know if I'm talking your ear off here, Alfred.
Oh, this is an absolute fascinating story. I think first off, I just want to give you guys an absolute kudos. It takes a lot of gumption to want to immigrate and go to those lengths that, you hear about the immigration. And I know that's a sensitive topic with the political climate we have here in North America. But when you hear something like that, the desire to come to a country where you believe you will have a better future and a better life, and to have the fortitude and the courage to live on a cruise ship for a year and do all these struggles. I mean, I'm sure you talk about it now and your wife and yourself probably smile and you're just like, man, we did it. We went there.
Yeah,
Holy moly.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm sure in the middle of it, tempers might have flared, frustrations might have gotten the better of you. I know my wife and I were there too on a podcast. My wife and I did. We talk about, in the middle of it, when I stood firm and refusing to get vaccinated, I was like, I'm not doing it. And
Mhm.
that wasn't a political decision. I've been asked a few times since that podcast. I've never had a flu shot in my life. This
Yeah,
has been my approach to my personal health care my whole life, regardless of a global pandemic. So I
yeah,
just stayed the course. I didn't allow myself to be kind of waver, but that in and of
yeah,
itself was a struggle. We had
yeah, yeah.
struggles our home that people didn't see that we're okay talking about. I'd like to talk into a little bit the motive, why the the decision to leave South Africa. People may not know, we're very privileged here in North America and even
Yeah.
in Canada. People may not understand why somebody would go to those lengths, live on a cruise ship for a year, not,
Yeah.
during a pandemic, set up a renter, quit your job, support your wife.
Yeah.
Like why? Some people might ask, like, is it that bad? Or, they just may not know. If you don't mind shedding some light on that, so people here in Canada and the US and North America can realize why the Western Hemisphere is a place sought after by people around
Mhm.
the world as a place of opportunity and a place of freedom. Talk to me a little bit about the mindset and the motives behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. When I get asked this question, I always tell people we are real fortunate. I would say the majority of people that I know that immigrate out of South Africa are carrying some sort of trauma along with them. So something happened, whether it was a home invasion or a hijacking or something like that. But there's usually some sort of traumatic event that sort of became the foundation of the decision to move out of the country. For us, it's the complete opposite. South Africa definitely has got its own political struggles. They have, I mean, I don't think it's unknown that there's corruption within the government. They're currently struggling with keeping the power system up and running. So South Africa is currently going through what is called load shedding. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Yes, I
So,
have. Yeah.
for the audience that doesn't know, so load shedding is effectively a schedule where on your power grid gets switched on for a couple of hours and then gets switched off so that your neighboring power grid can have electricity. So effectively, the infrastructure is failing to such a point that they can't keep the lights on for the entire country all at the same time. So everybody's getting a share of it as the day goes on. And depending how bad it gets, you might end up with power for, I don't know, 8 hours a day. It could be 2 hours a day, which is catastrophic for when you're trying to plan food. And if you don't have a gas stove or oven or something like that, you now need to, and your power could be from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., which means you need to get up at 2 a.m. so that you can cook until 4 a.m. so that you've got food for the rest of the day. Um,
Wow.
and that is, I mean, that is regardless of where you find yourself in the income stream for your just man, what's the word that I'm looking for? Regardless of how much money you earn, you could live in a mansion, you still won't have power. So there's nothing, you can't escape it. But for us, yeah, the decision to come to Canada was purely based out of opportunity. One, I like the idea of earning a different currency, seeing as the South African currency is, I guess, is one of the weaker ones in the world. A big decision driver for myself was the fact that if my children would one day be able to have an additional citizenship status, I think that would greatly be to their advantage. And that led me to do some research. And at the time when making the decision, Canada was in the top 10 countries in the world as to when it came to the strength of your passport. I think in that year, Singapore was the top country. You could visit 192 countries with a Singaporean, I think that's the correct way of saying it, passport. And Canada was like 182. So I think there's like 207 countries in the world. Don't quote me on that. I think I think it's close to that number. And you can visit 182 of them with a Canadian passport. If you compare it to a South African passport, I think ours is like 26 countries, of which most of them is contained within Southern Africa. So, for example, on I'm part of the board of directors for our Chamber of Commerce here in the community that I live in. The chamber is currently putting on a trip to South Africa as a networking event that you can go through. Day one of that trip is you fly from Canada to Zurich, and then you've got like a 10 or 14-hour layover. So if I was to take that trip and go with everybody else from Canada, and we land in Zurich, because I've got a South African passport, I'm not allowed to leave the airport. So everybody else on that trip would be able to do a day trip, but I won't be allowed to leave the airport because I would first need to apply for a Schengen visa to enter the EU, the European Union. So so yes, trying to give my kids the opportunity of, doing away with that and being born as a Canadian citizen was a big decision driver for me, which I'm now very happy to say that we achieved. So I've got two children, a daughter and a son, 3 and 8 months, and both of them were born here in Canada. So we're busy with the process. My daughter has got dual citizenship with South Africa and Canada. I've logged the application for my boy. But yeah, at the moment he's already got his Canadian passport. So the the opportunities that life in Canada will present my kids is way different than the ones that I grew up with. And just the day-to-day factors as in like I read the news in my community, and something would happen, like there would be, I don't know, some sort of event that would happen, like crime related or this or something like that, and it would be main news. And every time I see something like that, I'm thinking to myself, that wouldn't even have, like in South Africa, they wouldn't even have bothered to open up the jar of ink to write something about that. Like kids here, they run around, they leave their bikes in the front lawn, you wake up the next morning, it's still there. There's no massive fences with electricity wires running across the fence around houses over here. Like there's none of that. There's open community, everybody knows one another, everybody's helpful and all of that. And having that sense of community is another thing that I didn't think of when making the decision to move to Canada, but I'm so appreciative of that environment for my kids where they're going to grow up in. I'm actually my daughter will at the end of this year we're gonna go visit family in South Africa. My parents haven't seen my boy in real life. I've only seen him over a phone. And he'll be 1.5 by the time they physically touch him for the first time. So those are some of the hard sacrifices you make when moving to the other side of the world. But you look at your kids and you sort of say, okay, they might not really know their grandparents, but what they're getting is worth so much more. And the challenge as the parent is to raise them in such a way that they're appreciative of that. Because for them, it's just going to be the norm. For me, I'm real appreciative of the environment that we find ourselves in. So yeah, those were so the future of my kids, and I'll also be honest, the financial compensation for physicians within Canada is far better than what it is in South Africa. So that was also a big decision driver. And yeah, and both my wife and I are massive sports fans. So, being situated in North America where you can go and watch golf and Formula One and tennis and all that sort of stuff. That also there was icing on the cake for us when making the decision as well. Yeah,
Wow. I appreciate
definitely.
you sharing all that. I imagine some people listening to this, the idea of only having power for 2 hours a day and
Yeah,
waking up in the middle of the night having to cook your food for a day. Yeah, we need to understand that we have freedoms and privileges that have been earned over time, through
yeah,
war, through sacrifice, through, constitutional and Bill of Rights and, ingrained in our
absolutely.
democracy. So people need to understand that, don't take that for granted because it can be taken away pretty quickly. And before we dive into your expertise, because I'm really interested in seeing how that immigration process would be focused on your wife a little bit. Doctor healthcare is kind of universal, right? That's a very international industry. People getting sick and needing help. It doesn't really matter your nationality, your language, your background. That's just kind of a very understandable thing that's, cross culturally. But with supply chain, I'm really curious. But before we do that, I want to get your take on the current political climate in Canada. And I'm sure it might be laughable to you when you look at where you came from and you have people complaining about American booze on the shelf, and you're
Yeah,
sitting there talking, oh, we had electrified fences and, we
yeah,
had government control telling us when and where we could shop. And I'm really
yeah,
curious when you see people, kind of, for lack of a better term, bitching and moaning about
yeah,
stuff that
yeah,
really aren't a big deal. Shed a little bit of light on that people might be frustrated and making, online anger posts on social media and Trump this and Trudeau that.
yeah.
A little bit about what you likely look at as frivolous and meaningless and really not a big problem, but people are making it a problem. Talk to me a little bit about
Yeah.
your perspective. I'm so interested in this. I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah, what a great question. So yeah, there's definitely there's things that I go by on a daily basis that I'm like 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 my wife and I would tell one another like the Canadians have got it so good that you need to invent your own problems just so that you've got something to keep yourself busy with. Like when you're not sure whether there's going to be water coming out of the pipes when you get home, then you don't have time to worry and bitch about the smaller things. Yeah, as for the political climate, I find myself personally, if I had to, I'm not allowed to vote yet because I'm not a citizen. But if I could, I would be more of a conservative. I'm a big fan of capitalism, and earning what you've built. But yeah, in terms of the Canada, as you've mentioned, like throughout the sacrifices you've made, you've got a lot of freedoms, that was earned a real hard way. And it's I think you do a lot of as a Canadian, as a people, you do a lot to sort of remind yourselves of that. But yeah, if I do a comparison between the political climate from South Africa and what we've got within Canada, there are a lot of things that I think gets blown out of proportion. If I start thinking about I'm trying to see. I don't want to touch on too sensitive topics, but yeah, there are certain things that I definitely agree with, and certain things that I definitely do disagree with. Is there anything, Alfred? Is there anything specific within the political sphere that you want me to comment on?
Well, I'm just curious, like when you hear about our prime minister resigning, but then quasi not resigning, or you hear of
Yeah.
something where, like, I don't know if you know the story, but he created a holiday called Truth and Reconciliation Day, where we basically pay homage to our Indigenous and First Nations and kind of the struggles that they went through, and
Mm.
acknowledging residential schools and the horrific story
Yes.
around those,
Yes.
and what people would probably term as colonialism, and
Yes.
basically taking indigenous nations and pushing them off to the side and kind of, for lack of a better word, putting our thumb on them a little bit.
Mm.
Basically just assertion of force is really what it
Yeah. Yeah.
was. But then on the very first one that he created, he took an $80,000 surfing vacation in Tofino, BC.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so like from a morale standpoint, I'm a huge believer in attitude reflects leadership.
Yeah.
And for almost a decade now in Canada, we've had this privileged pretty boy, like smiling into a camera, making a trip to India, hiring a celebrity Indian chef on taxpayer dollars, basically getting made fun of at some of these
Yeah.
international conferences. And that's
Yeah.
just from the top. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about local. I'm talking about the politicized, kind of head of the snake, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When you hear these things and you see these things, and like you said, you have real world problems, like your wife and yourself, and you're trying to get citizen for your kids. I'm sure, like you said, when people are here and they make this part of their bigger issue, you probably smile, turn to your wife, and be like, "We got bigger fish to fry. We
Yeah.
got a big goal in mind." But
Yeah.
but of the little bit that you do see and you are exposed to, and I'm sure maybe Ray has been a little bit of a bug in your ear about that because I know he loves that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It really
I'm just
does.
curious when you hear of those types of stories and Canadians really make that their problem and they really
Mm.
consume themselves with it, and they find themselves on social media and in friend circles and maybe disowning friends that are conservative versus liberal or liberal versus
Yeah.
conservative. What is your take on that when you look at,
Yeah.
basically, I guess what I'm asking is when Canadians make these, fictitious and made up problems that they think affect them, but it really doesn't. But it
Yeah.
really affects your patriotism. It affects your
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
ability to be a proud Canadian, because it's like, how can we be proud when the people who
Yeah.
are voted to represent us are kind of jokes?
Yeah.
And I'm picking on Trudeau because he's kind of easy, but even in
Yeah.
Alberta, we had
Yeah.
Jason
Yeah.
Kenney, during the
Yeah.
pandemic, he told everyone, "Hey, you got to lock down." But then somebody
Yeah.
had a picture of them eating at one of the most expensive restaurants on the rooftop in downtown Edmonton,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's like, dude, you're a joke, like you're a
Yeah. Yeah.
jackass,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that really it doesn't really seem to be specific to one party or the other.
Yeah.
People like to fly that red or blue banner, or in
Yeah.
Alberta, we
Yeah.
do have orange. But I'm curious from your perspective because I think that you have such a valuable input that people that find themselves so conflicted and so divided and so married to a political ideology, where you have a perspective of, guys, it's fucking politics. Move
Yeah,
along and let's face some issues in front of you. Maybe you drink too much. Maybe you don't have a good
yeah,
marriage. Maybe you
yeah,
don't have your kids.
yeah,
Like, I feel like you have a great perspective because having had to really deal with the government head on, coming
yeah,
to Canada, filling out the paperwork, dealing with all that
yeah,
stuff. You've dealt with a bit of, racism in Canada where it's like, oh, you're not Canadian, la la la. Like, all
yeah,
we're pretty good in Canada with that, but I'm sure there's been,
yeah,
some of
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Those people exist. I really love your perspective of, guys, it's fucking politics. Put it to the side, deal with it as much as you want, but don't make it your world. Don't make it your
yeah,
frustration. Move
yeah.
on. So if you want to share a little bit about that, and then we won't beat this horse too dead. I really want to get into your story, but yeah, just a little bit of light on that, and then we'll go right into it.
Okay, cool. No, thank you. Yeah, thanks for clearing it up for me. In terms of, yeah, like from Justin's side, telling everybody to tighten the belt and sort of say we need to push through this and all of this, and then going on your own little vacation. I mean, that's just a dick move. So yeah, I completely disagree with that. But yeah, from a political standpoint, I think the one thing that Canadians need to remember is that your vote still counts. I believe that, the ruling party in South Africa has been in existence ever since 1994 at the end of apartheid. And we have an election every 4 years as well, but they've been in power for over 30 years now. Unemployment is up, the national debt is up, education is down, infrastructure is non-existing, and all of that. From a Canadian point of view, your vote still counts. You can actually go to the polls and make a change. There's a I've got no belief whatsoever that going to the polls and voting will change anything in South Africa. I haven't seen anything that will convince me of that just yet. In Canada, at the very least, if you are unhappy with the party that's in power at the moment, then vote them out and get the change that you want when the opportunity arrives. The sacrifices that have been made that gives you that right doesn't come very easy. And the fact that you've got that right and that executing that right actually does lead to real world change is a privilege that shouldn't be taken for granted. If My big fear is I'm scared that I don't know if you've countries like Rwanda and Zimbabwe and all of that. They used to be countries that they were thriving politically, economically, and all of that. They've been run into the ground. It's almost it would be almost easier just to scrap everything and build it over from the ground on up. And my fear is that that would happen to South Africa. So yeah, when I drive around with my kids and I see, the everyday Canadians, and to your point, yeah, I mean, we've met people that are like a real welcoming, and other people that are sort of like, yeah, well, we don't need more, immigrants in the community. Although when it comes to immigration, my point of view on it as well is like this. I've told Ray this is to like if let's say in South Africa I had a tradition which was a national tradition of every morning at 2 a.m. I wake up and I go stand on the roof of my house and I need to blow a horn for 10 minutes. When I make the decision to immigrate to another country, if that tradition is not part of the culture of the country where I'm immigrating to, I forego the right to continue with it.
Wow.
If that makes sense. That's my mentality. But it's also a big part of the reason why we chose Canada because it matches very closely to our existing value system and our existing mentality towards, life in everyday routines and all of that. But we do, when it comes to mindset, and again, when I look at, people within the community and all of that, a lot of times I would tell myself, Canadians, they just need to sit back, relax, and harden the fuck up. Like there are worse
I
things in
love
the
that.
world than what you are going through.
Oh, that's
Okay.
such a breath of air. Thank you so much for making that statement.
No, that is like that is like seriously, like this cannot be your biggest problem in the world that you are dealing with, and that comes from everyday things. Like somebody, I don't know, I'm trying to like I want to be respectful of people's privacy, but I hear my wife come home some days from work, and she would like say, "You won't believe what she's had to deal with in terms of people coming in with a medical problem, but then it's because they lost their wedding videotape, and they've now been crying for 2 days." And surely that can't be the best use of your time to come and sit in front of a physician and cry for an hour and a half. Like there's medically nothing wrong with you. What do you need? But
Wow.
yeah, then my mind very quickly goes to, you need to harden the fuck up. Um, on the flip
Love that.
side of that, where I will say is we're Canadians, they are real hands-on. Like you guys, I mean, like in South Africa, a garage is where you park your car during the evenings and close the door so that you keep it safe. In Canada, everybody's garages is like a workshop, and you guys are real hands-on in terms of your own maintenance, your projects that you take on, and that sort of stuff. And I love that. Like the amount of YouTube videos I've needed to watch to upskill myself in the last 4 years that I've been in Canada is ridiculous. And it's from I mean small things like I don't know, like yeah, like the lawnmower stops working. In South Africa I would phone somebody and pay them to come and do that because it would be relatively cheap compared to taking the time to find out what's wrong with it myself. But in Canada that's a different story. So you constantly you're learning, you're unlearning, you're learning new stuff. And I love that. And I love that my kids will grow up in that environment where, a normal part of society would be that you need to be self-sustaining. You need to be able to think for yourself. You need to be able to solve your own problems. If there's an issue with the gutters, that's your problem first. Is there somebody that you can phone for that? Most probably, but it's going to be real expensive. So, how it's I always tell my wife when she comes to me she hates that I do this, but when she comes to me with a problem, I usually ask, so what did Google say? And then she'll just look at me and then I'll say, so what did YouTube say when you typed that question into YouTube? And then like she'll give me the finger. And then normally I'll like close it off with, what did ChatGPT say when you asked it for the answer? But the point that I'm trying to convey is that there's so many tools out there that allows you to, find the answer yourself. And I think it's sort of something that the Canadian society has been living. And I think it's probably true all across North America. But yeah, there are certain things where you really just need, it's not as bad as it can be. Definitely, yeah, minor issues, minor issues.
I love it. Yeah, thank you so much for speaking from the heart because I feel like people are going to hear this and you might take offense to it. And really, if you do, I don't know, go get a helmet, like whatever, man.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I mean, what do you want to say, right? Like, if you're
yeah,
making something, Tradoofus did, and you're, oh, that's my biggest issue of the day. It's like, man, you need to either create more problems that are actually problems and
yeah,
solve. But yeah, that
yeah,
concept of autonomy and that concept of self-sufficiency, that's a huge value of Canadian and likely American too. People might take for granted. And, when it sucks that outsourcing something that you don't have the skill to do is so expensive that you kind of have to do it. So the quality would likely suffer as a result because people who are professionals are that much more expensive.
yeah,
You hire a contractor to fix your home, if they're really high quality, it's going to be expensive, but you know that it's going to be done right. So you have to kind of pick and choose your battles
yeah,
depending on your economic status and your ability, to kind of have the means to do that. But I love some of the things that you spoke there, and you spoke from the heart. So thank you very much. Because
yeah,
yeah, some people might need to hear this. I want to go into you. We talked about your wife being a physician. Thank you so much to her. Doctors are definitely something that might go underappreciated, but yeah, I absolutely love a high quality physician. It's a thankless job, and as much as you're
yeah.
compensated, likely not compensated enough. So thank you very much to your wife. Talk to me a little bit about you. You said that you were in supply chain in South Africa. I'm sure expertise in supply chain in South Africa versus Canada. We have a little bit, like you said, our passport goes further. So I imagine our borders go further, and you have the
Mhm.
ability to touch more corners of the globe with a business and with that ability. So talk to me a little bit about your business, what you do, and how you provide service to people. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so my background in logistics is sort of something that I'm very, very grateful for. I took quite a bit of schooling prior to starting my working career. So after finishing high school, I originally went to university to study finance. But I found accounting to be too big of a challenge for me, and I was told that I would need to complete accounting all the way into my third year. So I switched from finance to marketing. And it was during while I was studying that degree that I got introduced to logistics as a subject. And that's sort of where my passion for the industry kicked off because I found it real interesting. I mean, we were talking about stuff when you're in a shopping mall, and you're waiting in the line to get to the till. It's always in a zigzag format. And like why is that? It's because it gives you provide time for the customer to actually stand still. And if you have a look on the racks, it's always women's magazines and candy. Because those are studies show that those are the people that do most of the shopping, and those are the things that people will buy on an impulse, and that's like built into the business design. And I found that fascinating. So that sort of is where the seed started. Ended up doing a postgraduate degree in logistics because of that after finishing my marketing degree, and then started working for a company called UTI, which was eventually bought over by a company called DSV as a global supply chain company. I'm currently I've got my logistics world on a pause because when we came into Canada, it was obviously for my wife's work, and within the community that we sit in, although we're very close to the oil fields, there's not a lot of work in that field. So I actually ended up staying home for the first 14 months of us being in Canada. And that was due to the reason when we got the email stating that all the paperwork is done for immigration, and we can, my wife got a start date, I think, of May 1st, 2021, to report in Canada in West Lock, just north of Edmonton, for her what is probation or assessment period. She needed to do a 3 months assessment period. So that was also still in the heart of the pandemic, and there was quarantine times built into travel. So from the date that we got the email, that meant that we needed to be on a plane within the next 10 days. Otherwise, we won't have enough time to quarantine in Canada before she needs to start work. I believe that was a Sunday night, and then on the Tuesday morning, we found out that we were pregnant with our daughter. So the next evening, we had a massive family meeting just to tell all of the family, by the way, like we're on our way to Canada. We'll see you when we see you. And my wife, she doesn't find it as funny as I do, but I told everybody she's now changed from being just my wife into being my wife and a bodybuilder. And I said she's literally building a body. And I don't know, nobody got the joke but me, but I thought that was quite cool. Anyway. But yeah, so we told them we're pregnant, and I'm telling you all of this just basically to tell you that. So when we got to Canada, we obviously had no support system, so the decision was very clear to us that I will stay home with my daughter and I'll look after her until she can go to daycare. So yeah, within the supply chain and logistics world, while I was looking after my daughter at home, I'm obviously looking for different kind of jobs, and I'm not really finding anything that works for me. I end up going around, I'm talking to myself and telling myself, okay, daughter, you need to make this work for you. So toughen up, get in front of people, and you need to get the job done. So I end up going with a stack of my resumes to all of the big companies within the community that I live in. We're only 15,000 people, so there's not a lot of them. One of them being the municipality, and I end up having a chat with the mayor and the CIO from the municipality. They sort of know my wife because they, get introduced to all of the positions when you come into the community. To cut a longer story a bit shorter, so what ends up happening is that the city phones me because they've created EDO, Economic Development Advisor role within the city. And they remembered that I dropped off my CV a couple of months or weeks ago before then in that period. And I get a call and ask whether would I want to interview for the job. So I actually end up getting that job. So I spent a year and a half working as the economic development advisor for the city. While that time, dreaming, putting in the work, writing the business plan, and all of that for starting my own business management consulting agency. And that's where I am today. So currently, I am the owner of Golden Thread Consulting. Um, so I do business coaching and personal development. Some of the clients that I see are people within the political environment within our community. So I do some leadership coaching for them. I do team dynamics coaching. Tomorrow, I've got a personal finance and budgeting workshop that I'm putting on together. So it's all those sort of business related services that I do. For larger clients, I do what I call business analysis and industrial engineering. So effectively, I work on a reverse percentage commission fee. What that means is if say you were a business and you have a turnover of $1 million or more a year, there's most probably inefficiencies within your business that you are either aware of and don't know how to fix, or unaware of and paying for without noticing it. So what I do is I charge a once-off business analysis fee, and I analyze your entire business, which usually includes looking at your information systems, your financial flow, and your operations. I then, after completing the analysis, I then identify areas of improvement, which I believe we are open for improvement. And then we agree on a percentage to sort of say, okay, so if I look at these areas and if I modify them to such a way that they improve and you actually save money, let's say you save 20 grand a month or whatever, if you're a medium to larger size business, we then agree upfront on a percentage of that saving comes to me. So effectively, I operate like an accountant. You pay your accountant to save you money from CRA. I'm the same way. So I'm going to give you the money that you're going to pay me with by saving you the money out of your own business. So that's more of the business management consulting sort of side. And on the personal development side, I work with teams. I work with normally it's like management teams or sales teams where there's they need to some conflict resolution, team dynamics, or just some leadership training or stuff like that. But yeah, that's sort of the stuff that fuels my passion. I'm a real big believer in personal development, and I love reading all the books and listening to all the podcasts and just growing my knowledge base every single day. I tell my kids and I tell myself, that every day you just need to be 1% better than what you were yesterday. And yeah, so your biggest enemy is your current version of yourself. So that's who you need to beat. Yeah, and I try and portray that to my clients as well when we do that. So yeah, I guess that's me,
Oh, I love
Joel.
that. I love that. I love the idea of giving people that worry-free mindset of reaching out. And yeah, there's an upfront cost for your time to do a proper assessment because that's just dead hours. But the idea of potentially saving somebody and then only taking a percentage of that, that seems like a stupid decision not to make as a business if you don't have
Yeah,
the ability to do that. If you're saving 20% and you're charging 5% of that 20%, which is a
yeah,
great revenue, that's a very easy business model to want to follow. And
yeah,
I think self-auditing a business and self-auditing yourself is important, but when you get a third-party view, they're unbiased. They're not,
yeah,
they're judgmental in the correct way because it's
yeah,
in your best interest to find those inefficiencies and to find, maybe you're doing QuickBooks and you're buying
yeah, yeah,
TurboTax for $1 million a year business, and it's like, no, 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 no. I'm going to hook you up with an accountant that's going to save you $20,000 on taxes. He's going to
yeah,
charge you 3, and I'm going to charge you 2, and you're going to take
yeah,
the $15,000 and take your wife and kids on a nice vacation.
yeah, yeah,
Like so,
exactly. Yeah,
and it's not going to cost you anything. Like that's kind
yeah,
of that's just a quick and dirty example I can come off the top of my head.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I love that. I think that's really good. Real quick, if you, through the clients that you've worked with, can you give me an example from a business perspective and then a personal development perspective where you think most people and businesses lack? What's been a common inefficiency or a common struggle that clients have come to you that you've identified that seems to be more common than people might think? And then on the personal development side, what is something common that you see people do? Is it nutrition? Is it mindset? Is it alcohol? Is it depression?
Mhm.
Is it Justin Trudeau? What could it be? And then on the
Yeah.
business side of it, what are some inefficiencies or some areas that, on small business, but maybe also big business, they might overlook or they might not really
Mm,
see?
mm. So I'll start with the business side. On the business side, it's usually when it's the smaller businesses, it comes to cash flow. So when it usually starts by, you take a look at the bank statements, you can see there's a lot of money coming in, but money is moving out just as fast as it's coming in, sometimes even faster. And but when you speak to the owners and you ask them like, are you making a profit? They would say, absolutely. Like, how do you know that? So, no, but we have a ton of sales. It's like, okay, but do you actually, like, if you open your bank account right now and you look at it, what number are you going to see? Are you going to see hundreds of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars? And then that's sort of where the light goes on to sort of say, so yes, you've got a lot of money coming in, but it's moving out. So cash flow is usually the big one. And then I would say I call it hidden costs, but it's not necessarily hidden costs, but it's costs, it's things that you sign up for your business, for example. So let's say you sign up for some subscription service and you forget about it, but that keeps going off of your account every single month. And I'm using that now as an example, but for a larger business, that could be something like the contract that you negotiated with your supplier and the rates that you pay to that supplier. Like, the point I'm trying to make is that you need to review that from time to time to make sure is that does that still reflect the needs of your business and by extension the needs of your customers. Most of the time, you're overpaying for the items that you need to run your business, and that's usually where the savings are. If it's not there, then it's usually within the process of how you deliver your service or build your product. And whether that's utilities, manpower, hours worked, cost of goods, or something to that nature, that's usually where they would be. But it's, yeah, not reviewing your costs and managing cash flow is definitely the two ones for from a business perspective that I come across the most. From a personal development side, the thing I come across most often is people wanting to improve their leadership. And I always start by asking them, okay, so what is leadership to you? And then it's sort of, I usually get a bit of a blank face. But it's people that are, they're in a position of authority, they're looking after a team, but they're not achieving the goals in such a way as they want to. And so by extension, they believe it's leadership that's lacking. There is obviously some truth to that, but sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's the dynamics of the team as well. Or sometimes there's that Simon Sinek has got this one great example of, if you've got a team and you walk into that room and you ask everybody in the team, why is the morale so low and nobody wants to answer you, but you ask them then show me who's the asshole in the team and they all point to the same guy. That's often the problem as well, is that there's one individual that's pulling everybody down. But yeah, when it comes to what I love about personal development is usually the client already has the answers. You're just asking the questions in the right sequence that they know what they want to do. And it's, yeah, sort of reminding them that when it comes to leadership, leaders by extension develop new leaders. So yeah, so being the example for the rest of the team and creating them into leaders in their own right is what I do the most when it comes to the personal development side.
Oh, I love that. I love the business real world example. It's translatable to personal. The
Yeah,
amount of subscriptions that people have that they don't use, and they're focusing on the wrong thing. Like they're like, oh,
yeah,
I gotta shop for no name groceries, or I gotta get a second
yeah,
job, and there's inefficiencies in your personal life, and business is just an extension of that.
yeah.
On the flip side, the idea that that cash flow is so interesting to me because I have a small business with my brothers. We've been doing it for 8 years, and we're running into a cash flow problem just because of the
Yeah.
seasonality of our business. It's
Yeah.
very heavy winter, very light summer. So
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
that ebb and flow. So we kind of have
Yeah.
always hyper focused on the winter, but not to the extension of expanding it over the summer. When that revenue stream changes, we have to
Yeah.
change as a business. And so that's
Yeah.
something that we recently. The one thing that I know was a little bit of a game changer for us is when we started focusing on margin rather than numbers. Is you
Yeah.
look at things percentage, is that way it might only seem like a small change when you're, say, quoting out a job, or whenever you're going to accounts payable and you're saying, no, I need to increase this to that, or this
Yeah.
monthly service increase by a percentage rather than a dollar value. And I feel like when you operate on percentages, it doesn't matter if it's $100 contract, $1,000 contract, or a
Yeah.
$1 million contract. 10% is
Yeah.
10%, and you may
Yeah.
not think that 10% on $100 is worth that $10, but when you're consistent as a business, it's transmutable no matter how much you grow or how much you shrink. Is when you
Exactly.
keep those margins the same, and you look at, we call it OP, overhead and profit. When you look at those things and that stays the same regardless, it actually makes your business efficient. You're not trying to sit there and say, oh, well, I've never done a $10,000 a month contract, but if you have a
Yeah.
$100,000 contract, you're just 10%.
Yeah.
It's translatable across the board, regardless of where you're at. So that's been a
Absolutely.
really big game changer for us when we talk about margins versus numbers. You just deduce it down to a two-digit number or a one digit, depending on where, what your margins
Yeah.
need to be. But that's really easy because it makes it simple, no matter the
Yeah.
scope, no matter whatever. So that was a big game changer for us. And then I love the fact that you said businesses are oblivious to their numbers. Is
Yeah.
outsourcing is a massive, massive problem in
Yeah.
entrepreneur and business. Is when you
Yeah.
outsource everything and you're only
Yeah.
focused on your service. This is a conflicted message because a lot of
Yeah.
stuff online tells you focus on what you're good at. But
Yes.
as a
Yes. Yes.
business, you cannot outsource a lot of their stuff unless you're sourcing it in-house. If you hire an in-house accountant
Yeah.
or an in-house COO, something like that that handles the numbers, that's different. But you need to be
Yeah.
able to read. You need to be able to look at a graph or look at a chart or look at a financial report and understand your trajectory without it being highlighted like you're a fucking sixth grade kid. You
Yeah.
need to be able to look at it and say, okay, we're on the right path, or where is all of our fucking money going?
Yeah.
Or why have we dropped 30% of our clientele? What is happening? You can
Yeah.
see that with a very popular podcast I listened to, the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet David. He
Yeah.
has a partner named Tom, and he has a famous saying words talk and numbers scream, because he's a
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is so true, because truthfully, you need to be able to do these things. You need to be able to create or look at a general financial report and be able to understand your business at a glance,
Yeah.
not to the depths, but look at it and say, this is a good report or this is a bad report.
Yeah.
And then you reverse engineer it and try to get down to the problem. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that insight. And then, yeah, on the personal development side, leadership, it's an intangible skill. It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
everybody can get it, and not everybody can get it. It's difficult. I know some managers and bosses I've had, you can tell.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to the beginning of this podcast. A gentleman named Ray. Ray has
Yeah.
leadership quality. He has leadership skills.
Absolutely.
It starts with
Yeah.
the energy. Are you
Yeah.
a high positive energy person, or are you always down?
Yeah.
You can be the best subject matter expert in any field, but if you're somebody who's always down, always pessimistic, always, nitpicking things and micromanaging stuff, people ain't going to follow
Yeah.
you, man. It's just the
Yeah.
way it is.
Yeah.
You can give me all the dedicated tasks all you want. I'm not going to respect you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go above and beyond for somebody like you, which
Yeah.
affects morale, which affects engagement, which affects a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that perspective. I'm not going to keep you too much longer here. I want to give you open shout outs, kudos, props, websites. Where can people find you? Give us the nitty gritty. I just want to give you the open mic, Daru, and yeah, let people know what's going on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alfred. Yeah, I really appreciate the invite to be on your podcast. I really enjoyed this. Yeah, people can find me. I'm online and on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Golden Thread Consulting is what you need to Google to find me. The website is simply goldenthreadconsulting.ca. You could reach out to me over there. All of my contact information is there. Yeah, big shout out to Ray. Thanks. Yeah, thanks Ray for being. You hate that I call you a mentor, but that is exactly what you are. Thanks for being a mentor, and thanks for the introductions to Alfred so that we could do this. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and thanks to you as well for taking the time to meet with me. Yeah, and congratulations on the new addition to the family coming soon. So yeah, and I guess I'll finish off just again touching on mindsets. Is that when you're sitting with your problems, whether it's personal or within business, take a look back at the problems you had 6 months ago and ask yourself if you're still sitting with the same problems. If that answer is no, then it shows you've got progress. So every setback, every rejection is recognition that you're moving in the right direction. That's my own slogan that I've written across my mirror. I'm naturally kind of a shy guy, so I need to get in front of people like salespeople do and be rejected so that I can grow out of those environments. You only grow when you're uncomfortable. So I try and force those sort of environments. Stuff like this is exactly a good example of that for me. But yeah, and then just as well, when I'll take an example from my wife. When she was stuck on the cruise ship, there came a point in time where they were unable to move the bodies of passengers that have passed away on the ship from the ship. So there came a point where they needed to have a conversation about, is there space in the food freezers on board for the bodies of people that won't be able to get off the ship in time? Now, imagine the problems that you've got, and then imagine yourself being part of that conversation. So most probably the issues that you've got aren't that bad. So like they say in Australia, harden the fuck up, mate, and just get on with it.
I'm so stoked you ended on that. That's so awesome. Okay, Daru, well, thank you so much for your time today, buddy. I really appreciate it. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, please reach out. I'm going to put all these links in the show notes below, and we'll catch you guys in the next podcast. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Unmodern podcast. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, like and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Unmodern Podcast. Do you have suggestions for future guests, or if you're interested in being a guest yourself, please visit unmodernpodcast.com. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.